The thing with timeouts that I'm always concerned about, whenever you call one and you don't want to yell, you just want to calm things down and maybe even loosen them up, they're playing the goddamn music, they're doing all sorts of on that clock, and you end up yelling. So that's why I try to stay away from, in certain situations, from timeouts.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast. We have a special. John Tortorella is out as Flyers coach. We kind of speculated that this could be his last year behind the Flyers bench. It came a lot sooner than a lot of us thought. I'm joined with the great Dan Silver. Maybe Chef might be able to make it, but we had to get an episode to you. Dan, what's your initial thoughts and feelings? And Daniel Briere just got done his little presser there.
Well, you know, on either our last podcast or the one before that, I was saying, I think I answered a question about Torts saying that I would be surprised if he was gone in the offseason or for next season. I was way off base. Now, Danny has been saying that Danny said in his press conference today that it's been the last few days where this really started to become something that they were looking at. And the press conference that he just had a number of kind of revealing things, but I was wrong. I thought that they wanted to have Torts as part of this rebuild. But, you know, when Torts comes out after the Toronto loss and says that he's not really interested in coaching a team that is going through, you know, a situation like this, I think those comments certainly escalated the situation, and they made the decision this morning to move on from John Tortorella. So I think a lot of us thought that he might be joining the Flyers front office at some point. You know, that stuff was clearly way off base. Danny said that they'd never had those discussions. It was not, he still considers John Tortorella to be a coach. And so, yeah, I mean, I was surprised, but based on what's going on for the last week, and I think in the press conference today, there was a question towards the end of it about if things last season might have had some impact on it. And Danny said, yeah, you know, maybe some of the things that happened leave scars. I feel like maybe Couturier, that was talking about benching Sean Couturier. And I think that probably they haven't liked the way that he's handled Cam York over the course of the last week or so. He was benched for basically the entire Toronto game. So I think that things like that really contributed to this. And now the Flyers coaching search will start anew.
Yeah, I mean, they've lost 11 out of their last 12 games, 19 of their last 25. Their leading scorer, Travis Konechny, just scored his first goal in the month of March on Saturday. And it was such a big deal for him to go to the Four Nations, and he's been in a slump ever since. They've gone 0 for 31 on the power play in their last, 12 or 13 games. They've yielded 10 opposing power play goals for below 70% PK in that period of time. And this has been a total disaster for them. You know, under different circumstances, if it wasn't a rebuild, this wouldn't be a surprise. But I think there was a deterioration that, like, you were talking about with Couturier, and their seeds were planted that John just, when things go sour, John doesn't try to salve the wound. He kind of throws salt in it. And I think it really weighed on them when Danny had to come out after he was bench Couturier last year and come out and speak up for Sean and say, hey, Sean's battling a lot of injuries, and John didn't give him a break. John made it, well, he's not injured, he's just not playing well. And total contradiction comes with Danny Briere basically covering for Sean Couturier. And I'm like, that was a divide. And then they got off to a slow start this year, but they didn't seem to reconcile everything and move it in the right direction. But once things went sour, it's kind of like the old wounds were reopened.
Yeah. And one of the comments today in the press conference was somebody asked if maybe the fact that they almost made the playoffs last year gave Tortorella higher into this season, and maybe the fact that they almost took a step back impacted Tortorella. And I think maybe there's something to that. He's such a competitive guy that the way that this team has just completely fallen apart. And Danny took some of the blame for that. He said, look, we had these deals come to us for players, like Lawton and Frost and Farabee, that they just felt like they couldn't turn down, right? The same thing with Sean Walker last year. So Danny, took the blame for the team's recent play with some of those moves that have been made. But maybe John Tortorella, even though he said the right things about being ready for a rebuild, maybe he just ultimately was not ready to actually go through with the rebuild. And it was interesting in the press conference today, Danny, you could clearly tell Danny didn't pull punches. He said that, that him and Torts and Jonesy did have disagreements over the last, few years about different things. And that one of the great things about Torts is that he lets you know how he feels. He's not a yes man. But I think ultimately maybe there just grew too great a divide between the fact that Briere and Jonesy wanted the players to be dealt with a certain way during a rebuild, and Torts was sort of unwilling to listen to some of these things. I can't imagine that Briere and Jonesy, approved of him scratching Couturier. They probably don't approve of the way that he's dealing with York right now. There's probably some other things also. So I think that, that's kind of what it comes down to. And now it's, Brad Shaw, I think is I'm a big fan of Brad Shaw's. He's going to be the new interim head coach for the last 9 games. I'm not sure that he's head coaching material. It seems like maybe he's, he gets into the weeds a little bit much based on what I've heard. And he's so calm, cool, and collected. It's not it isn't the typical head coach that you would think of. I'm kind of excited to see how he reacts in some of these press conferences and what he does starting with the team tonight at the game against Montreal. So it is kind of going to be refreshing to have a non-Torts guy in there. And something else that someone mentioned was it might help them in the off season lure specific free agents here or get restricted free agents to sign offer sheets, because, at the Flyers town hall, they were asked about if they think that Torts is an impediment to bringing free agents in. And they said, look, the kind of players we want to bring in, are the kind of guys who would want to play for Torts. While that is probably true, they have to acknowledge that there are probably some players out there that they would be interested in that just because of Torts' reputation might not have wanted to come here.
Yeah. I mean, you have Chris Pronger going out on Twitter talking not only about last year at Couturier, but the whole thing with Cam York. And Cam York is not what we wanted him to be as a player, but pretty much a straight shooter. So people tend to believe him if there was a communication gap. And if Cam York said there was no real communication as to why he was benched, just for a game. I'm not even talking about the last game versus Toronto. That was a soft play. Okay. But again, you would think with somebody like York that he would have, okay, you sit him out for the rest of the second period for a soft play, but then you bring him back in the third period. And he's done that with Michkov, who's a rookie. And York's a 19 draft. I mean, so there's an inequity there. And I think it feeds into what you're saying. If the Flyers have that wink and a nod while you're at the season ticket holders meeting about, well, the offer sheet. And no matter how unrealistic that may be with the cap increase or whatever, the fact is the Flyers want to be able to attract players. And if it becomes, a stigma of having him as coach, they don't need that right now, because it's pretty clear, Dan, that Briere said this is about as low as it's going to go. They basically have bottomed out. And from here on out, maybe not at the pace we would like, but from here on out, they're building this team. And they don't need that problem, particularly if Tortorella maybe felt he had more sway or slack with the organization than he actually did. And I think that's part of the issue as well.
Yeah, that certainly could be part of it. I mean, you look at a guy like Morgan Frost, and I know that Danny Briere is a fan of Morgan Frost. He probably just got tired of fighting with John Tortorella about Morgan Frost, so he ends up trading the player. I wonder if Briere kind of saw the Cam York thing going down a similar path and being like, look, like these are players that I think can be part of the future for this franchise. And I just keep having these arguments with them about our coach. He benches them, he scratches them, and it's a, in all forms of life, in all organizations, there are power struggles among individuals. And this was sort of set up to become a power struggle, especially when I think Briere and Tortorella disagree about a certain number of players. And I think it probably just got to the point where it was like, okay, we have to be able to have some of these guys that we think are pivotal to the rebuild playing, and not being like Cam York out in the media saying he's being scratched and he doesn't know why the coach isn't communicating with him. Right. Like, that's not a good thing. And I think at some point, probably Briere and Jones and Hilferty were just like, all right, enough's enough. Like, we've got to move on. We've got to find someone that, they don't have to agree with everything, but they need to do things in a little bit more of like a productive manner with the players and to help the rebuild.
Yeah, a little bit more harmonious. And John is kind of like, well, this is what I really believe. But after a while, you can only stick your thumb in your boss's eye so many times. And if Danny's not his boss, then the combination of Danny and Jonesy are. And then, of course, Dan Hilferty could get involved. But I don't think Dan Hilferty, while probably consulted, is really the guy that made that choice. It was really Dan and Danny and Jones. And it said, you know what? This triumvirate of including John, it's just not going to work out. We're in harmony, but with Torts, we're not getting that harmony. And we can't go on because, like you said earlier, Dan, if you think of like Frost and Farabee as like sacrifices to Tortorella saying, look, these guys can't play. Provorov and Hayes are one thing. And like you said about York, it's like, well, okay, York is headed down the same road as these guys, and I'm putting my foot down because I didn't like the way Couturier went down. I don't like some of the benchings that Tortorella, some guys have earned a little bit more sway. I get it. But the inequity of it all and the fact that John is so stubborn, it just got to a point where it didn't fit anymore. And then like the last few weeks, like you said in the press conference, they had to move on because they couldn't carry on. And I think the last few weeks or few days with the lack of communication and some of his wild statements and being short in the press conference, if you added up all these and you started checking all these negative boxes, it just took its toll. And the Flyers said, you know what? We're out. That's it.
Yeah,
right,
I think
Chef?
that's kind of what it came down to.
Yeah.
And Chef just joined us as he wants to add his thoughts.
Well, I will say this. I didn't think it would happen this early. I thought there was a very good chance that he might not come back because you probably would, if you were going to bring him back, they probably would have extended it by now just to get to get everything out of the way, because that would have been an easy one if they were going to keep him. So they were still on the fence, in my opinion, keeping them all through the end of through next year. So, but you know what? It had to be done. I think, people were saying that, did he lose the team or did he not lose the team? I mean, the team doesn't have quit in it, and I guess you can give them credit for that. At least they weren't just laying down. The problem with the team is doesn't have enough NHL players on it. And if he probably says some of that stuff behind closed doors, he probably still has a job. My opinion is, and this is personal, no, whatever. I think he's just tired. I think he's just done. I don't think he has a rebuild in him. And I think he knew darn well what he was going to say when he said it. And he knew what the consequences could be. And he probably was looking for, all right, here's my out. If I say this, then I'll have my peace of mind, and then I'll be out of here too. I think so. I think it might have been self-inflicted, the whole thing.
So you said it's kind of like a quasi AV angle. Like AV got overwhelmed by the pandemic and everything, and even though he came back, his heart just wasn't into it.
Yeah.
And that Tortorella kind of reached, for different reasons, under different circumstances, had reached a similar point in his mind and acted out with regard to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because obviously it hits and everybody's texting and talking all day, about what's going on. And I just think, it's just, he got to the point where maybe he doesn't have 2 years left in him for a rebuild to keep doing this grind. I mean, he's in his mid-70s, right? I mean, this is
Tortorella is 66.
Oh, he is? Okay. Mid-60s. Yeah. That's still a lot, man. That's a lot of travel. That's a lot of, late nights, and stuff like that. So I could totally see him just being like, you know what? I don't want to do 2 more years on this team, or 1 more year on this team to get it through to like such a young team, an inexperienced team, for all that. He doesn't have it in him. And I just think, it was easier. Like, maybe it was like, maybe I'm not getting that, like, that bump of players next year, and I'm going to have to go through this all again. So, yeah, I think it could have been self-inflicted.
Well, yeah, I don't know if he's still with you. Dan, if you want to get any last second thoughts before you hit the road here.
Yeah, I've got getting on a train here to go from Philly back down to DC. But just a couple things. Danny said that, obviously they haven't started looking at coaches yet, but some names that I'm expecting to circulate, I would say, one would be Rick Tocchet, depending on what happens with Vancouver. It's been such a shit show there. I wonder if he might want to leave there. RodBrind'Amour, depending on what happens in Carolina. I think that the way that everything has gone down this year there, that could be an option. David Carl's going to get a lot of thoughts from Flyers fans. Obviously, he's a young guy who, is very well respected. Matt Carl's brother. So there's three interesting names. But yeah, it's I think it's going to set off an exciting summer. So I will say goodbye to you guys, and I'll be back on early next week for our next show.
You got it. Take care, Dan.
Safe travels, Dan.
Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, you can catch Dan on Blue Sky and X, of course, at DSilver88, at DSilver88. So, yeah, Anthony DeMarco, our buddy from the Daily Faceoff, reported he was the first one who scooped it with the information, and that came, I don't know. I was doing something. I forget what it was. I was finishing up, it was 8 hours ago, so it was about 9:30, 9:40.
I found out at like 9:21. A friend called me, and I was driving, so it must have been like right after 9 a.m.
So he broke it, hearing John Tortorella is out in Philly. And I've speculated that I just I couldn't see Torts coming back as a lame duck. And this whole thing about him in the front office, I think that came from Doug McLean. Because there was a point in his tenure in Columbus that John supposedly, according to Doug McLean, okay, so there's your source, said that John had envisioned himself ending up in the Blue Jackets front office after he stopped coaching. And then, of course, he was let go by the Blue Jackets organization, and he, ended up with the Flyers. I don't know. I guess the idea is that the three of them, and I mentioned this earlier with Dan, that it was Jonesy, Briere, and Tortorella were going to be the three-headed monster that brought the Flyers back to perennial contention. And I think we made some assumptions along the way, because John seemed to have more input just by appearances. than most coaches. And like he would, especially in exhibition games. And I think, what was it? Was it late in his first year or last
Yes.
year?
Last couple, at the end of
Yeah.
the season, he would go up into the skybox and let.
And they're like, yeah, man, people don't do that. I mean, it's like, so this is like, to me, it's like, well, John almost has like a front office mentality. And I know he was probably experimenting with like seeing the game, an actual real game, and he liked doing that. But yeah, I think that whole thing fed into that vibe when you made it with the rumors that Doug McClain put out there. So
Yeah. Well, you know what? A lot of people were texting me and they were happy. Some of them were like, "Oh, what are we going to do now? Who are the candidates?" Who was the first one that Dan had mentioned in the rumor mill that he had heard? I missed it because I was changing my headset.
Rick Tocchet.
Rick Tocchet. Okay, I was just going to bring
Brind'Amour and David Carl. David Carl was an NCAA player who was drafted, and then they found out he had some kind of congenital heart problem. And he's Matt Carl's
I remember
brother.
all this. Yeah.
And he ended up coaching in Denver, I think.
Yeah.
And he's won at least one title. I apologize for not being up on how many NCAA titles he's won, but he is the singular most popular college coach out there.
Oh.
There's some minor league guys that people were talking about, like Todd Nelson, and a lot of people might think, well, let's find the next Spencer Carberry from like Washington. Okay, and Todd Nelson actually was a guy who I think he might have preceded Spencer Carberry, but I'm not sure in Hershey. So it gets, now that we kind of delved into that, if you take a look at the bigger picture of where the Flyers are at, I don't know how much of what Danny had to say that you caught up with, but it sounds like the Flyers have hit bottom and they're going to build from here on out. But don't expect, like this offseason, don't expect them to have like an offseason like Homer had in 2007. It's not going to be that dramatic.
But it's going to be. Yeah. I think it's going to be dramatic. I mean, how can it not be right now? I mean, remember, who was it we had on? I said I had asked about like this roster can flip 7 to 9 players. And I know we talked about it years ago with Jason Martinez, and he said I was crazy thinking that. And then I brought it up again, and we're at 6, 7 players right now.
Yeah, but they were tearing down though,
Yeah, I know, tearing down. And then, but you got, this roster is going to look totally a lot different next year than I think. I said, because some of these younger kids and younger players here, either they have to, just commit to them or move along. And I just think that, with the ability and the stuff they have, the money they have, that they're going to change. Now, when we were speaking, we were all talking about it earlier today, like, around the water cooler talk, so to speak, people are pissed that he's gone because, well, what are they going to do now? They're, the same arguments came up. And I said, I tried to interject and say, like, this new regime is only like 2 years in, with Briere and him into this rebuild. Right. I know. And my thing is this, you're like, yeah, but they're 5 years away from 5 years away. And I'm like, I get your argument, but like, until I see what happens in the off season, I'm reserving my judgment here, because everything they've done so far, I like it. I like how they cleared the cap space. I like how they cleared players. I like how they got, they're getting down to it. Who's a part of the future? Who isn't a part? And they're really making those hard decisions. And that's what they're going to have to do. And I like that. So for me, I don't know. I'm happy so far. It was a necessary firing, I think, because of what he said. And I think, like I said, I think he wanted it to happen. But I will say at the same time, don't like Danny was talking about the coaches. Pick who you want and pursue who you want. And if that's the guy you want, just don't hold out for for, let's just say, we think Brind'Amour, if he doesn't make the conference finals, we think he's going to get fired, so we're going to hold out for him. No, if that's your guy, then you hold out for him. But don't, I guess, like, hem yourself in to one person. Take everybody seriously and pick the person that's going to be good for the long run. Just like he was talking about the center. Don't pick Mr. Right now, pick Mr. Right, and work with that. And same thing with the coach. I think it's just as important, if not more important, to make sure that you're getting the guy that's going to help you with this rebuild.
Well, he talked about that, that they're in a different stage. I just want to reflect back on something. I got a couple points here. I was communicating with somebody earlier today through the O&B Puckcast account. You can follow us on X at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. Same thing, Blue Sky. Just plug in there, O&B Puck. And also on Getter in independent form at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. Anyway, and he was saying Tortorella, it was yesterday. I talked about, Tortorella is the one who in December of 22, when Chuck Fletcher was talking about we're only 5 or 6 points out of a playoff spot, he was the one that dragged the organization kicking and screaming to the point where we need a rebuild. We got to build this from the footers. And people forget that. So my point in bringing that up now is John Tortorella served his purpose.
Yes.
Okay. His purpose was to bring the organization into Realville. Mission accomplished. He also had to reinstill them with a work ethic, a certain level, or what they call a standard of expectations that you're going to give an effort, and that you play for this organization. There are some things that are outside the boundaries, and that's why you get sat like last night with Cam York, right? So, yeah, I agreed with sitting him down because he made a soft play. But like Bundy said earlier on the snow to goal, he said, yeah, but then you have to bring him back for the third period. What is the point in keeping him out the whole game? And it's stuff like that, and the Couturier thing. And I mentioned Pronger earlier when Dan was on, and Pronger. I just wanted to nail down that tweet. Last year, Pronger tweeted out about Couturier, and he said again, lost it last year at this time at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So this is like a phenomenon now. Now this is like a pattern. Right. He lost it at the end of the year when they made the trades, couldn't deal. They just fell apart. He kind of fell apart. And then, his scratch made it worse, by scratching Couturier and saying, well, he's not injured. He's just not playing well. And then Briere basically contradicts to Tortorella. Right. And then this year with the whole thing with Cam York. So that he took them. So for anybody out there saying, oh, they're starting over. Well, wait a minute. Daniel Briere did not hire John Tortorella. That was a Chuck Fletcher hire.
Yep.
So this one will be on a Daniel Briere. So anybody thinking the Flyers are like spinning their wheels has no idea what they're talking about, if I could be so blunt, right? The Flyers, as we mentioned in our last show, are going to have roughly $13 million in salary cap space after they pay York, Forster, and Cates. And then they can demote a kid, before the opening game on paper at 6.25 of Ryan Ellison's money. And now we're talking about in season almost $20 million. And that's before any moves are made, during the draft or what have you. So Briere was cautious, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's going to be a bigger offseason than I think. Briere was very cautious like that, maybe wanting to give himself a little slack. But either way, it's going to be a build from here on out. And the idea that you have all these people out there saying they want Gavin McKenna, who's going to be the next Connor McDavid, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. The Flyers are going to probably finish in the top 6. And no, I'm not worried. I'm not worried that Bradshaw is going to bring new life to this team. They stink. Okay, they're stripped bare. Their goaltending is awful. And relax, okay? They made the right move for where they're at right now. I guess that's all I have to say.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Because like the arguments have been every time the Flyers have a hard coach that they like this, they get rid of him. I'm like, he was here 3.5 years. He served his purpose. Get over it, guys. I mean, he wasn't going to be the one to take them to the cup anyway. Because if realistically, if you thought that they were the team that was a couple moves away, then, that's 2 seasons right there. So guess what? Nope, it ain't happening. He's not going to be the guy. So and I think I think there'll be some serious talk about who is going to be the new head coach of this team, because I think that's going to be the biggest move that they make in the offseason and the most important one, I think.
Probably. I mean, at a minimum, I would expect them to look for a center who can be a bridge to just have a level of competence down the middle with at least one more player. I have no idea what they're going to do with Jetlachenko.
Well, he just got assigned to the Phantoms this year, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get too deep into a lot of that stuff. Yeah, but guys like Lachenko, Bump, Alex Chernik are going to be with the Phantoms. They signed Ty Murchison. We're going to get into that on our show next week.
Good.
Because the number one problem with the Flyers right now is the slotting. If you wonder why Cam York and Tyson Forster, Tippett, and all these guys are struggling most of the time.
Stuck in a rut lately, too.
Part of it recently is because of the trades and their locker room and all that. That's valid. But in general, the problem with the Flyers is the slotting. They have some good players, but they're being called upon to do things they're not really capable of doing. So if Cam York is a second pair defenseman, I think we'd be very happy with him. But because he's on the top pairing with Sanheim, who I think is yet another second pairing defenseman, this creates a problem. And this exists all over their lineup.
Yeah.
So if they can get a center and they can get a starting goalie, but like a tandem guy, it doesn't have to be a 50, 60 game guy. It has to be like a 45 game guy who can, and I don't know who that player is. We can talk about that next show, but I think that's where we're at. I think that's covers a lot of territory of why John Tortorella got fired, what led to it, and what could be coming down the road. Any final thoughts while your computer's making itself known there?
Yeah, it's my phone. Sorry,
I
thought
phone.
I had it down.
You're popular with that. I know that.
Yeah, I'll just say this. I mean, you speculate and have fun speculating all you want who the next coach is going to be. We're probably not going to find out right. I'm pretty sure that I think they'll have somebody before the draft, because you want your coach set in there before that. It'll probably happen right after the playoffs are over, and they'll take their time looking to see who's available. I think they should take their time. I don't think they should rush into this. I think they give people very good considerations all across the league and look at. Is there anybody I'm pulling for? I have a couple that I like, but I'm not overwhelmed yet with anybody. All going to be what's available, I think. So, and you can argue with us at on O&B Puck at O&B Puck, and you can definitely argue with me. I've been doing that a lot lately on Facebook and Twitter with the fans. Get me at Brendan Gillespie on Facebook and Chef the Left B on Twitter.
You got it. You can follow the O&B Puckcast on several podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon, Audible, and of course, we're on YouTube and Facebook. Just type in O&B Puckcast and it'll pop right up for you. If you could follow and subscribe, whatever applies to your platform, we do appreciate it. It'll help move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts. So just a reminder that we didn't get a chance, we went right into it. We are sponsored tonight by FlyersNittyGritty.com, Jim's South Street, Summit Adjusters. Of course, you can get down to Jim's at 400 South Street, 40 years of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries, and the grandest Philadelphia tradition. Check out Jim's South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. So that's all we have for you tonight. Until next time, everybody, take care.